You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Let's get into it, brother.
Okay.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and very excited to have Joe Uehlein, labor organizer, labor thinker, unionist, singer, musician, and Joe, thanks for spending time. I've since I've done this show, I've really had an inkling to get a chance to chat with you, and it's arrived. So thanks for coming on the show, brother.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about the labor movement and music and some of the bigger things that we work and strive for. But prior to getting into that, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about when you were younger? Did you have an artist inclination? Were you plucking around with music? What were your sensibilities like when you were young coming into this world?
Yeah, well, I did, and I sang with my parents. My father played guitar and sang. My mother played piano and sang, and we would do it together, as a family. So I kind of grew up in that milieu and listening to, Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and Joe Glazer and others like them. So yeah, I had an orientation from very early on.
Yeah, and so I think anybody who's getting into let's say with labor music, it's particular, social activists. It's laden in history and in some deep histories,
Yeah.
within folk music. Just generally speaking, I was wondering what does a labor song do for folks when you play it? It's a collective activity. Like what happens there, and how does it help us in the movement? I was just wondering.
Well, I think first of all, it depends on the song, but I think the biggest thing is it is something that we can do as an individual that's also part of a larger whole. And that's kind of like what joining a union is. You, as the song goes, you've got to go down and join the union by yourself.
Yeah.
So, it is an individual decision, but it puts you into something that's bigger than you are with like-minded people. It builds that solidarity and camaraderie that you don't have a lot of in other aspects of life. So it does that. Now, again, depending on the song, it can also tell a story that people may not know about a particular strike, a particular leader of an effort, a strike or a protest or something, where a song is written about the people who organized it, story of struggle. And so it's a good way to educate and at the same time inspire and motivate people to step up and take action themselves.
Yeah, that beauty of empowerment.
Yeah.
I got one of the big questions I wanted to ask you here, because it's on the forefront of my mind. I wanted to ask you in particular. The question is what is art, and I think I just want to make a comment. That's the question, but I think when we think about music and we think about this question, what is art? I mean, I know, I studied it at the university.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be it feels sometimes like this erudite, otherworldly type of thing. And I think when people think about art, they think about, expensive pieces, on the wall. So there's this inherent stuff that goes along with that. But I wanted to ask you, Joe, what do you think art is?
Well, at the most basic level, it is life. If we're living life well, we're living it artistically, whether we know it or not. So I think that art is living, it's life. But, for me, in the labor movement, as well as the climate change and environmental movement, other movements I've been involved in, peace and freedom, all of that, we tend to be taught rules. Like Saul Alinsky has his rules for radicals. And there's 11 or 12 of them in the book. And they're great. They're kind of, I like to think of them as guideposts rather than rules. But I'm a big believer in improvisation. And so I don't like rules that much. And I think organizers hold themselves back by strict adherence to rules. And they think, well, these are the rules. This is how we have to go about it. And I think that's limiting. And so what art brings in is an element of we can play around with these rules. We can, like one of Saul Alinsky's rules is, whenever possible, operate outside the experience of the adversary. So he even built into one of his rules, he's saying, you don't have to follow the rules. Don't do what they've seen you do before. Come up with new things. Be creative. Yeah. And I think the creative element, it could stand more of a resurgence in all of our movement organizing. So art brings that. It brings creativity. I think that I like the writings of Stephen Nachmanovich when it comes to art. He wrote the book Free Play, which inspired me a lot when I read it 20-some years ago. He has a new book out called The Art of Is. And that's really about what he calls the three imps: improvisation, impermanence, and imperfection. And that we all hold those three imps inside of us, and we need to understand it and deal with it and use them, even imperfection, of course, use it to our advantage. So art is mind-opening.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for your comments, Joe. I was thinking about, particularly within art and organizing, I think when you're involved in these activities, there's a desire to always do the right thing, to make the right call, the right decision, play the right angle. And when you get involved in these things, it's one of the main things you have to do is say, okay, it's going to be very different, or could be very different 20 minutes from now. And, that we got to kind of adjust and create. And I love how that's embedded in some of your thoughts there about that creativity and following the angle, and maybe that the rule isn't going to work because the conditions on the ground are much different than the writer anticipated.
Right. They're always different. Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah, thank you. And I know your answer probably got into components of this, but I do ask it explicitly about the role of art today or right now, or what art's supposed to do. I hear what you're saying, what art is, but does it have a particular role, a particular place for our human life right now, 2022? What are your thoughts there?
I think it does. I think it's a way that we can raise questions that agitate, and by that I mean that challenge existing assumptions about the world we live in, about power, about how we organize. It can challenge us to think differently. It also, in this world where we are now, everything is so fast. This whole digital world we live in, and I think what art can do is, whether it's a great song or a painting or a poem or whatever, can kind of arrest life for a moment and invite contemplation. Now, you have to be open to it. People who are, they're just into swiping the screen, they'll pass and miss opportunities. But art can help us. It can stop life, help us, invite contemplation, help us think creatively about the challenges that we face. And, at the most basic level, it inspires in a way that the written word can't. What I should say is, we write a lot of reports and commission reports to explain this problem or that problem, and we do white papers, and that's all great, but it's mostly an intellectual thing. And what art does is it speaks to the heart or the soul or the center, however you want to think about that. Art speaks to that. So it goes beyond the intellectual pursuits. It has a lot of roles. I mean, if you think about, go back to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, little kids, they naturally play free without any regard to rules. And they can keep doing it for hours when they're together. We lose that as we get older and we go through the educational system. It kind of strips us of that sensibility. So reintegrating art into life, I think, is just super important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. We're talking with Joe Uehlein, labor musician, thinker, has worked on strategic campaigns, the AFL-CIO. He also does a ton of work on labor and the environment. And I had mentioned to you briefly, Joe, I very much glom on to thinkers like yourself who are talking about the labor movement and talking about the environment, and talking about them in a deep way, in a sense of what our thinking is, what our thinking needs to be, again, at this time in this age. So when you speak those words, they feel to me. Let me just say one thing: labor movement at time feels to me to kind of always be trying to catch up to kind of like the next thing, to always trying to respond and get up in front of major social issues. We think about racial and social injustice. We think about the environment. These things are, of course, interrelated. But I wanted to ask you, given your work on this topic and how deeply important it is, what are you seeing? What is your take on the labor movement, seeing the climate crisis and what's happening with how we think about things like jobs, productive jobs, and sustainable jobs? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of progress being made in the labor movement on these issues. They're being made because labor folks are seeing, what's happening and where the economy's going and what has to be done to solve the climate crisis. And there are jobs there being created in renewable energy industries and other industries, and they want to organize those, which is great. Those jobs must become union, or else the example I use is you might have climate jobs, like jobs that are good for solving the climate crisis, but if they're crappy jobs, then they're not sustainable, because sustainability, the concept, rests on this three-legged stool. When any one leg is missing, the stool falls down, and that is economic justice, social justice, and environmental justice. Those are the three stools of sustainability. Too often, companies, they will co-opt the term and just make sustainability about being green and nothing else. That's a bad trap. You don't want to fall into that. and a lot of people do in the environmental movement because they want to solve the environmental problems, and they don't think about the workers who are hurt or those who are getting the new jobs but without pension, without health care, without good pay. So we always advocate for full spectrum sustainability. I think one of the biggest things for labor when it comes to climate change is that climate change itself is the real job killer, not the answers to climate change. Climate change is going to decimate entire industries. It's already had a huge impact in places where there have been, like Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy. New Orleans lost 40% of its economy in the aftermath of Katrina, and maybe 25% came back. There's a permanent loss of 15% of the economic activity in that city. And we're going to see a lot more of that with the fires and the floods and all the stuff that's coming. So climate change as the real job killer is, I think, an important concept for us to be talking about.
Yeah, I think there's been maybe the way we've culturally dealt with it, or maybe overall, is that it's been maybe an ancillary thing to think about. And I think it's imploring everybody that it is front and center among those components that you mentioned when we're talking about justice. I even think about, you mentioned Katrina in New Orleans. You think about that, after that as well, there were no public schools in New Orleans. It was became an entire, which was set up and thought that way to come back in and create a charter school, more privatized system there. So education, environmental justice, and that those jobs are no longer, as connected to the potential for unionization or whatever. They become a separate charter system. So
go ahead.
No, and it's just one of those examples where I think being upfront and thinking about these things, because many of us, who work in this know that when the disaster comes, there's a plan back behind it to enact. So just being ready for that. I wanted to ask a bit more of a again, where you come from question, and about it's a general question. You can answer it as you will, about influences on yourself. And the question is, who or what made you who you are, Joe?
Yeah. Well, I'd say for starters, my parents. They were both union organizers.
All right.
My dad worked in the mills in the Cleveland-Lorain area of Ohio. And, I was 6 years old when the 1959 steel strike started. Ended up being the longest strike in the history of the industry. 110 days, ran through Christmas. That had a huge impact on us because we had no income for 110 days. And so Christmas was like, socks and underwear. That was it. And we were down on the picket lines all the time. I, as a little 6-year-old kid, was down there walking the picket line and hearing the songs. And so that all had a profound impact on me. And then right after that, the Lake Erie, which to us was like our paradise. We swam in it all the time. We ate the yellow perch by the hundreds and hundreds. And then all of a sudden, toward 1964, 65, 66, they started to post the signs. You can't eat the fish. You can't swim in the lake. And so all the smoke coming out of the steel mills, which always just meant bread on the table for us, started to mean something a little different. And that had an impact on me. And then when I got my first job, my family had moved to central Pennsylvania. I first went to work in an aluminum mill, but then I went to work on outdoor construction. And one of my first big jobs was the construction of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which sits, just south of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And every day I crossed the picket line of environmentalists who didn't want to see the plant built. I took their literature it made sense to me because of my Lake Erie experience. And I complained to the local union about it because they had a bumper sticker that said, "Hungry and out of work, eat an environmentalist." And I complained about that, and I got run out of the union hall. So I was starting to form. I then, of course, pursued a life in the labor movement, but always with those environmental sensibilities.
Yeah, I think that the bumper sticker, the antagonisms that exist there. I mean, it's manifest right there in those tensions, and I think there is something very, very, very profound about what you're talking about, where the prominence of Lake Erie. You think about those cultural elements, which happens to many communities, that something can be very much in the forefront, and all of a sudden is that which existed here is no longer for your interaction, consumption, drinking, eating, and that kind of thunderclap right there.
Well, you think about why pretty much all the fish contain mercury. That's because of the burning of fossil fuels for 100 years. That's why, and so we pursued the better life through the fossil fuels, coal and others, without thinking about, well, what damage could we be doing? Now we know the damage, yet we're addicted, and we're having a hard time weaning ourselves off fossil fuels. And the labor movement has pretty significant density in the fossil fuel industry. So a lot of members who work in oil refineries and out on the rigs and the coal mines, all that, which makes it really hard for unions to sort of accept that has to end. But it does. We know that. It has to end. We have to find the way to get off of that.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of kind of interactions and commentary around energy, but I even think it's pretty fascinating in seeing some of the building trades unions around things like wind power. I know back my former stomping grounds out in Boston, local 103 IBW out that way, and there's Block Island off of Rhode Island, which is sustained by wind as well. But just seeing building trades, it's all complicated, but just seeing the prominence and some of the ideas dig in where maybe they wouldn't have before about sustainable energy and that jobs do need to be sustainable on the criteria that you stated to be worth saving, I think.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing in both the building trades and the energy unions today is really a beautiful thing, because they are working hard to advance the wind power and solar power. That IBW local you mentioned in Boston, they were one of maybe the first labor organization that came out in support of the Green New Deal. And that was at a time when the IBEW National was very negative on the Green New Deal. The AFL-CIO was blasting the Green New Deal and still does. But that local leader saw it for what it was and came out in support of it. And then other locals and even a couple national unions, the UE, National Nurses United, SEIU, the AFT nationally, all then came out in support of the Green New Deal. So there's real, as much as we're still addicted to the fossil fuels, I'm inspired by what I see happening in that group of unions who are going all in for the renewables.
Yeah, there's some good activity. I think that's one thing for activists or folks deeply concerned, labor, environment, getting into these issues, that, there's different ways to look at it. You could look at it local and regionally or within certain subsections of labor. And maybe not be completely frustrated or disappointments on the lackluster press release around something, and just be
Right.
like, okay, there are some people digging in on this one, and where are they digging in? So I think that, I know in labor, for me, that ends up being really helpful to see where the activity is, where people are working on this. So
that's right. Yeah.
So one of the big, I have the big conceptual question coming up, but I wanted to ask you another one, just a bit, thinking about my listeners and thinking about labor music and labor songs. If you could just spend a little bit of time with that. Labor, it's a not everybody knows labor songs. They know probably what they would be, but can you just mention a few things about maybe some of the I know you did at the beginning, about labor acts, maybe some folks who are out there right now, some sounds around labor. How do people get acclimated, both with yours, and in other works, labor music?
Well, one of the best places, or centers for this kind of music and art in general, is the Labor Heritage Foundation, which has been around for some 45 years now, that I'm a co-founder of, and very proud of that. It's dedicated to working class art and culture, and that's where I first met Ricardo Levins Morales and Elise Bryant, and so many other inspiring, Ann Feeney, may she rest in peace. So many inspiring people who came to the Great Labor Arts Exchange, which will happen next month in conjunction with the Labor Notes gathering in Chicago. And it's been every year, since the beginning. It started as the Great Labor Song Exchange and then became broader Arts Exchange. But all those people building, on the shoulders of Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Joe Glazer, Joe Hill, and then, Cy Kahn, who's still with us, and John McCutcheon, who's still with us, and so many other artists who were inspired by the earlier ones and are carrying the tradition on. And it was tough through the post-Taft-Hartley era and the Red Scare, the McCarthy era, is when the labor movement got rid of a lot of the lefties, whether they were communist or not, because there was that non-communist affidavit in the Taft-Hartley Act. You had to sign it. And if you didn't, as a labor leader, you couldn't use the National Labor Relations Act or the board. And so, so a lot of the singers and songwriters, Pete Seeger's career was destroyed. He had #1 hits on the folk charts with the Almanac Singers, and then he couldn't get gigs. He flipped it around, and went into the churches and the schools and built a whole musical movement, that so many people were inspired by. Today, there's Emma's Revolution, Pat and Sandy, who make up Emma's Revolution. They're awesome, and they're out there every day doing this. Is their life. It's their full-time living. There's Cathy Fink and Marcy Marxer. There's just a whole bunch of people who have kept this tradition going. And it's, and then also I would be remiss if I didn't say that if we look into popular culture, we see the same inspirations there. We see, Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine and Audio Slave out on picket lines all the time, and wearing his Unite cap and his IWW cap and T-shirt. We see the same with Steve Earle and Boots Riley. They're writing the labor songs of today and performing them to large audiences. Yeah. So all of the stuff that was that people tried to isolate is now finding its way into a broader popular culture. Bruce Springsteen, there are a lot of them. Oh, yeah. So it's out there. And even ones people don't think about. Merle Haggard. people think, well, that's Okie from Muskogee. He's a conservative guy. Well, that's not really accurate. And he did change over the years and became very progressive and wrote a lot of working class songs. So, it's our culture as the working class does have a place in the broader culture, and we need to find all that music and art as well, and include it in what is our own.
Yeah, I thank you so much for that, Joe. And it's really, I appreciate it too, because it's not to miss or to pass over the vitality of those songs and and what's going on right now. I got to admit, my soul is a sucker for Paul Robeson. When
Yes.
not even just singing, when that man he is engaged and he's speaking.
Yeah.
Good Lord, I very rarely listen to anybody where it's like, everybody stop, wait till this is done.
Yeah.
Let him finish whatever he needs to say, and then everything else will go.
That's right. That's exactly right. There's a great song, and I'm blanking on the name of the person who wrote it. I recorded it on a Uehleiner's CD. That's my band. And it sings about 3 verses that pay honor to those who practice. The song title is 3 Chords and the Truth. Ry Cooder wrote it. Yep. 3 Chords and the Truth. First one is Joe Hill, then Paul Robeson, and then Pete Seeger. So 3 verses that pay homage to these 3 people, and then a chorus that sings about the 3 chords and the truth. But yeah, Robeson, he just had it all going on.
Yep.
And he had the voice, he had the presence. Very much a huge inspiration.
One of those that's tough to talk about. He just seems so profound, like in my thinking anytime.
Yeah.
So anybody listening, if you haven't connected to the just deep in engaging man that Paul Robeson was, definitely do some searching and look for that. I got the big question here, Joe. Of the podcast, big philosophical question, but tell me, in thinking about art, creativity, labor, what have you, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it is a highly philosophical one. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer it. I turn to others for inspired thought on this kind of a question. It's kind of like when I think about why I even do this, it's never been a choice. So why is there something rather than nothing? I ask myself that a lot. Why do I do that? Why do I keep doing it? I'm pushing 70, and I was at a gig this morning and I sang the Joe Hill song, There Is Power in a Union, the Joe Hill song, The Rebel Girl. I was singing all these rebel songs, and why do I do this? It isn't a choice. It's like I can't not do it. So I'm compelled. That's why there's something, at least just coming from my own experience, rather than nothing. But I think that's true with probably every artist, that they are compelled for some reason to create. And so there ends up being something rather than nothing, whether it's a painting, a poem, a song, a play. My friend Steve Jones and Elise Bryant, they've done these amazing musicals, about labor struggles. They're compelled to do it. None of us are making money doing this. Emma's Revolution is doing it full time, and they're making a living. They're not wealthy. I'm just saying they're compelled to do it. And that's why there's something rather than nothing, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. And, Yeah, and I know you mentioned Elise Bryan a couple times. I've been able to know and interact with Elise
Oh,
through
good.
some work with the National Education Association and
Oh, cool.
and otherwise. So,
Yeah,
yeah, the just living integration of art and creativity, organizing, labor.
yeah,
It collects there, and she's a tremendous
yeah,
individual and tremendous asset to
yeah.
all this work.
Right.
Joe, in wrapping up here, I wanted to mention to folks is we're going to have a track by Joe called "Water for Gold."
Hmm.
I'm going to ask Joe, if you could tell folks about this track, but also make sure folks listening to this here are going to be interested in your work on labor and the environment,
Hmm.
on your music, your
Yep.
creativity, the U-liners. So could you
Hmm.
just tell us about that song, "Water for Gold," and tell us where we find your other stuff?
Yeah. Well, I wrote the song Water for Gold after reading an article in the Nation magazine by John Cavanagh and Robin Broad. And the article was about how gold mining companies from the US and Canada went down to El Salvador along the Lempa River, and they figured out there was gold in the hills along the river, and they'd go get it like it was their gold to go get. And they did, and they polluted the water supply in the process of the gold mining process. And so people protested. They rose up, they organized, they protested, and there were assassinations of protest leaders. Um, so I was moved by the article to write this song and to, in particular, memorialize one of the leaders who was assassinated, Marcelo Rivera. And I like this track. It's on the U-Liners' most recent CD, and all of the info about my music can be found at the U-Liners website, which is www.uliners, that's ULINERS.com. And then the labor environmental work is at the Labor Network for Sustainability website, which is www.labor, the number 4, sustainability.org. And that's got all kinds of great stuff on labor and climate change on that website. But the Water for Gold song, I just have to mention, was I wrote it for acoustic instruments. So there's guitar, mandolin, violin, mandocello, and bass, and then a couple voices. And I really like the way it came out. It's one of my favorite tracks.
Uh, Tell me, Joe, what's a mandocello? I'm fascinated right now.
Yeah, well, the mandolin family of instruments has a piccolo mandolin, which is a little thing about like that big. It has the mandolin, and then the mandola, and then the mandocello, and a mando bass. So
Ah,
a mandola is a bigger version of a mandolin, and the mandocello is even bigger yet. It's, you still play it like this, unlike the cello that you bow, but
ah.
it's a big, it's a really big version of a mandolin and kind of difficult to play. I remember in the recording session, my mandocello player was like, "Hey, this is getting hard," you know. But the mandolin family of instruments is a fascinating family that people really don't know much about.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I hadn't heard that, so I just wanted
Hmm.
to jump
Yeah.
in. Thanks for connecting us to your art, Joe. I want to say, and speaking here, Joe Uehlein, it's been really important and it's been a great pleasure for you to be on this show, and I think that the work that you do, the connections that your mind and music makes are really important at this moment. So I appreciate you chatting with us and coming on to the show.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. But thank you very much.
Thank you, and deep respect to the memory of Marcelo Rivera and dearest Ann Feeney, labor singer, a musician. Joe, great pleasure. I'll see you sometime soon on the picket line. Okay, brother?
Awesome. Thank you, brother. Take care.
Take care now.
The Lempa River runs through El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, down to the shore, bringing fresh water to the people in the towns, farmers and ranchers, everyone around. They come from the north with their money and their guns for the gold in the hills where the Lempa River runs. Marcelo Rivera never grow old. Water for life, or water for gold. Water for life, or is it water for gold? Rose up in solidarity when their water was poisoned by the gold companies. Murals on the walls, marching in the streets for dead in El Salvador. They come from the north with their money and their guns for the gold in the hills where the Lempa River runs. Marcelo Rivera never grow old. Water for life, or water for gold. Water for life, or is it water for gold? Of the mountains, the rumble of the sea, the rumble of the people who want to be free. Marcelo and others live no more. How many dead in El Salvador? No more, no more in El Salvador. They come from the north with their money and their guns for the gold in the hills where the Lempa River runs. Marcelo Rivera never grow old. Water for life, or water for gold. Water for life, or is it water for